sharpening a handful of different blades. My machete was getting dull. I want to show you guys some technique. I always sharpen with a file. Some people like using a grinder. If you're not careful, you will detemper the metal. The grinder heats it up so much that it'll detemper, meaning the metal is hardened through a process called tempering. I could get way technical, I won't. It's best to use a file. And you're not always going to find a grinder out in the middle of the woods. So something that's portable. Learning this technique will keep you sharp anywhere. Machetes. With a file, always push. Never go back and forth. These are teeth on here, and they go one way. If you go this way with it, you fold the teeth down, you ruin your file. And always go full length of it. If you don't feel it biting in, then there's something wrong. You're doing it wrong, or your file's messed up. And with a machete, I oftentimes will go on one side of it, file it until I can feel a burr on the other side. And I've already been at it for a little bit. There's a significant burr. That's when I flip it to the other side and take that burr off. And basically, once you take that burr off, you're pretty well done. Just look at the blade next time you sharpen it and try to start on the edge that had less work done. Because if you do this technique, you do one side until you get a burr, and then the other side doesn't get as much metal removed, and it messes up your angles. So always alternate which side you're going to put the burr on. And a close inspection of your metal, you're going to be able to see that. Next, with a hatchet, axe, or anything of this shape, you always have the most damage, the most dullness at the very top. And if you just sharpen the very top, you're going to have a very misshapen cutting edge. It's going to just be funky. And this shape is this shape for a reason. You want to keep this shape as best you can. What someone taught me is to Sharpie the edge that you want to sharpen. Put a permanent marker on it, and then file off that permanent marker. It's a great, if you're just beginning to do this, if you're new at sharpening things with a file, it's a great way to start. It gives you a guideline. I don't use a Sharpie, but it is critical to, it's complicated holding the dang thing in place where you can get some pressure under it. But I have a lot of metal to take off at the tip, which means I have a lot of metal to take off the whole thing to retain that shape that I need. And the axes take the most amount of time. Always go one way, never go back and forth. And really mind your angles, meaning don't be like too flat and don't be too much of an angle. You got to find that sweet spot and look very close at what you're doing. You can see the shiny new metal. So that's the basics for that. Look, so I gotta tuck this between my legs and hold it firm. if you have a vise, it makes things easier. I don't use, I mean, I have access to a vise, but I don't like using it because technique. You need to learn that technique best you can. So with this side, I held it in the crotch. With the other side, you just gotta do what works. Now it's in between my knees. Whatever's clever for you. It's nice when you're sharpening a double-edged axe, and there's a blade on both sides, you can just jam it into a log, and then it'll stay in one place, so you can get both edges. Now for the most complicated one, shears. This works with kitchen shears, any kind of scissors. It's got an edge here. If you were to sharpen it at an angle like this is flat. And if you did that, you're gonna make it so the two pieces of metal aren't gonna touch. So this one, you specifically hit, and you make a burr like you do on a machete. And then, once you got a burr going, again, you gotta make sure you feel the drag of it. And there's metal shavings all over my pants. And that's what you're looking for. You gotta be removing metal to do any work. And then after you get a burr from filing it this way, turn it around and file it flat. You do not want to put any amount of this angle to it. All you're doing is taking off the burr. And that's critical, because I already said it, if you angle the inside of the blade at all, it's just not gonna cut. I always push into the blade. I never, let me show you on my machete. It'll be a little more apparent. I always push into the blade instead of doing something like this, where I'm pushing away from the blade. It's much more effective. It's dangerous. I was taught to always use gloves. I don't use gloves, but I recommend using gloves, leather gloves. And if I would use leather gloves every time, I would not cut myself nearly as often. I don't always sharpen my utensils, but when I do, I use a file. Stay sharp, my friends.